The plate slipped from my hands before I even felt it fall. 1 second. It was balanced on my tray. The next, it shattered against the marble floor, in a sound that cut straight through my chest. Every head turned. Every conversation died mid-sentence. The restaurant, usually a soft hum of money and perfume, went silent. And in that silence, I could hear my own heartbeat. Too fast. Too loud. Too human. My boss's voice came next. Sharp and certain. Lila. That's the third one this week. His words hit harder than the crash. I bent down, gathering the pieces with trembling fingers, whispering an apology that didn't matter. The porcelain was scattered like tiny white stars. Across the black tile, a mess I couldn't hide. Just like everything else in my life. I was 28. Working double shifts at a restaurant I couldn't afford to eat in. Living in a one-bedroom apartment that smelled like other people's dinners. My student loans haunted me. My mother's hospital bills followed me. And the future, the one I used to picture, had stopped calling my name a long time ago. As I swept up the fragments, I told myself it was just another night. But something in the air shifted, that invisible pressure before a storm. The maître d' rushed to the entrance. Suddenly, nervous, smoothing his tie, as if royalty were about to walk in. That's when I heard the name De Luca, even if you pretended not to know. Everyone in Chicago did. The De Lucas weren't just wealthy, they were untouchable. Real estate, construction, private security, and the shadows in between. Rumors said half the city ran because they allowed it to. I'd heard the name whispered 100 times. But I'd never expected to see one of them in person. And then he walked in. Adrian De Luca. Tall. Calm. Wearing a black suit that fit like a second skin. He didn't look around the room. The room looked around him. His eyes dark, focused, swept over the crowd, and landed on me. For one impossible moment. Everything else disappeared. The noise. The shame. The broken plate gone. Just that gaze, steady. Unreadable. And something in me that refused to look away. My boss appeared at my side, whispering harshly. Lila. Tablenine. De Luca's table. Don't screw this up. I wanted to refuse. My hands still shook. My knees still weak. But he was already walking toward the private corner booth. And somehow my feet followed. When I reached him, my voice didn't sound like mine anymore. Good evening. Welcome to Verona. What can I get for you tonight? His men ordered quickly whiskey. Scotch. Espresso. Adrian stayed silent, studying me. Finally, he said, You're new here. It wasn't a question. I've been here 8 months. I answered anyway. He nodded once. Slow. I would have noticed you before. My heart tripped over itself. I usually work the early shifts. Then I'm glad tonight was different. He said it without a smile. But the words felt like one. He ordered a Barolo, the 2010 Reserve. And when I turned to leave, his voice stopped me. What's your name? For some reason, he hesitated. Something about giving it felt dangerous. But refusing wasn't an option. Lila, I said. Lila Monroe. He repeated it, testing it like a secret. Lila Monroe. Then, softer. Bring the wine yourself. No one else. The rest of the night blurred into the rhythm of fear and fascination. Every time I passed his table, conversation stopped. Every time I leaned to set down a dish, I could feel his gaze on me, steady, patient, measuring. I told myself not to look back. I always did. By dessert, my nerves were frayed thin. One of his men, a broad man with too much confidence, brushed my hand on purpose. Careful, sweetheart. he murmured. Wouldn't want another accident. I pulled back, my face burning. Before I could reply, Adrian's voice slid through the air. Low and lethal. That's enough. Vince. The man froze. The entire table did. Adrian didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. Power didn't need volume. It needed conviction. She's not here for your amusement, he said. Our eyes met again. And though there was steel in his tone, there was something else beneath it, something that made my pulse stutter. He didn't look at me the way other men did. It wasn't desire exactly. It was interest. Sharp and curious. Like I was a problem he suddenly wanted to solve. When they left hours later, he signed the check, without glancing at the total, and slid it toward me. His fingers brushed me. Thank you for your service tonight, Miss Monroe. The sound of my name on his tongue did something I couldn't explain. I nodded, barely remembering how to breathe. Then he reached into his pocket and lifted something small, a thin silver bracelet. My bracelet. The one my mother gave me the week before she died. I hadn't even realized it was missing. How I started. But he was already fastening it around my wrist. His touch deliberate. Almost reverent. Take better care of precious things. Lila, he said quietly. His fingers lingered just long enough for the words to find a home inside me. The warning sounded like a promise. It was past midnight when my shift finally ended. The restaurant was empty. The city outside, breathing in neon and silence. I stepped out into the night air, grateful for the cool wind against my skin. The last bus was gone. I'd missed it counting tips. Then I saw it, a sleek black car idling by the curb. Windows tinted. Engine low and smooth. When the window rolled down, I already knew who I'd see. Adrian DeLuca. He looked at me as if he'd been waiting. Get it? I take the bus, I said automatically. The bus left 20 minutes ago. His tone wasn't commanding this time. It was patient. Persuasive. Still. He hesitated. He tilted his head slightly. I'm offering you a ride home. Not a deal with the devil. You're safe with me. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was something in his voice, calm. Unhurried. Dangerous in the way. Fire is dangerous when you can't stop staring at it. Whatever it was. I opened the door and slid inside. The interior smelled of leather and cedar. One of his men sat in front, silent, eyes forward. Adrian was beside me, his hands resting easily on his knees. For a moment, we didn't speak. The city slid by, in streaks of gold and shadow. Then he said, "You speak Italian." He blinked. Only a little. My grandmother was from Florence. He smiled faintly. You cursed in it tonight. Heat crawled up my neck. You heard that? I hear everything. His gaze turned toward the window. It's a good phrase. My father used to say it when he was angry. I haven't heard it in years. There was something nostalgic in his voice. Almost human. And that scared me more than the reputation that followed his name. Why are you doing this? I asked. You don't even know me. He looked back at me. And for once, I saw no calculation in his eyes. Maybe I want to. The car slowed. Which building? He asked. I gave him my address. The driver didn't even need directions. Of course he didn't. When we stopped, I reached for the door handle, eager to breathe again. Where? Adrian said, his hand hovering near mine but not touching. He pulled a small white card from his jacket, heavy, embossed. No name. Just a number. If you ever need anything, he said. Anything at all. I looked at the card, then at him. Why would you help me? He considered that for a moment. Let's call it curiosity, he said finally. For now, He slipped the card into my coat pocket. Himself. His hand lingered just long enough for me to feel its warmth through the fabric. When I stepped out, the night felt heavier. The car pulled away in silence, leaving me standing on the sidewalk with the sound of my own heartbeat for company. Back in my apartment, I dropped my keys, kicked off my shoes, and sat on the edge of the bed, still wearing my uniform. The card was in my pocket, the bracelet on my wrist, both whispering the same thing. This night isn't over. I told myself to throw the card away. Instead, I placed it in my jewelry box beside my mother's wedding ring. As if it belonged there, I told myself I'd forget his face. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw those dark eyes, watching me not like a predator, but like someone who'd seen straight through my defenses and wasn't afraid of what he found. When sleep finally came, it wasn't peaceful. It was full of voices, of the crash of porcelain, of a hand fastening silver around my wrist, and a low voice, whispering, "Take better care of precious things." Lila. I woke before dawn, heart pounding, uncertain if the ache in my chest was fear or something far more dangerous. Outside, the city began to stir, traffic humming. Si distant. But inside, something had shifted. The walls of my small apartment felt thinner, the air different, as if the world had tilted just a few degrees overnight. I made coffee and stared at the steam rising from the cup. My reflection in the kitchen window looked like someone I didn't recognize, a woman who had been seen, truly seen, and didn't know what to do with that knowledge. The bracelet caught the morning light, glinting silver against my skin. I traced the tiny scratches with my thumb, thinking about his words, his voice, his eyes. What kind of man notices a waitress's missing bracelet? What kind of man remembers the color of her eyes after one night? I should have known better. Men like Adrian DeLuca didn't notice women like me. Not for long. Not for anything good. But even as I told myself that, I knew it was already too late. Because the truth was simple and terrifying. That night, I didn't just drop a plate. I dropped the last piece of the life I thought I had. And somewhere in the space between the crash and his quiet, "Get in," everything began to change. Morning found me at the cafe that smelled like cinnamon and second chances. Rosa had already been up for hours, humming old love songs in Spanish as she rolled out pastry dough with the kind of strength women earn by surviving. The bell above the door chimed the way it always did, the sound small and honest. And I told myself, Act I of last night's madness was over. Coffee, tips, clean counters, a life I could keep contained. Then the door opened again, and the air shifted, just like it had at the restaurant. He didn't belong in our little corner of light and flower. That was my first thought. My second was that he knew it, and came anyway. Adrian stepped inside wearing a soft charcoal sweater and dark jeans that somehow looked more dangerous than a suit. His eyes found mine immediately, as if they'd been pointed here all night. Rosa stilled, the rolling pin hovering above the dough. She didn't say his name, but something old and careful flickered across her face. I wiped my hands on my apron, pretending not to notice how my pulse quickened. For no good reason a rational person could defend. He came to the counter and rested his palm on the glass, as if he were grounding himself. "Good morning, Lila," he said, and I felt my own name slide over me like warm rain. "Coffee," I managed. "A coffee," he said. "And whatever Lila recommends." Rosa's eyes cut to me, sharp, protective. She didn't need to speak. I heard the warning anyway. I slid a cup beneath the spout and steadied my hands. The machine hissed. The cafe breathed. Outside, buses sighed at red lights, and mothers tugged mittens over small impatient hands. Inside, time drew itself into a small quiet circle. that held exactly 2 people. I handed him the cup. He didn't take it right away. "You sleep. Enough." I lied. Something like humor tugged at one corner of his mouth. "You always tell the truth, except when you say, 'You're fine.' Fine is a luxury." I said, "I rent it by the hour." He studied me, like that was an answer he wanted to memorize. "Come with me to a charity gala," he said then. As if he were asking me to pass the sugar, I laughed before I could stop myself. "Right. I'll just pull an evening gown out of my apron pocket. You won't need to," he said. Unbothered. "My mother's foundation raises money for children's hospitals. Be my guest." There was a time in my life I would have called a friend and told her every detail just to hear us laugh about it. There was a time I would have said yes to everything, because I believed a yes could build a ladder out of any hole. But the world had taught me the price of wanting too much, too fast. "I'm working," I said. "You won't be Saturday night." He didn't say how he knew. He didn't need to. "Your mother," I said, because a part of me wanted to wound him and see if it drew blood. "Does she like strangers at her table?" "My mother," he said. And the word carried weight. Respects results. The foundation needs a record night. He took the cup, finally, and sipped. "And I want you there." He left a crisp bill beneath his saucer, and a gravity in his wake that didn't dissipate for hours. By closing, I had almost convinced myself to forget it. I almost succeeded, right until I found a white box outside my door. Tied with a precise black ribbon, the card on top felt heavy in my hand. The note was simple, almost innocent. "The color will suit your eyes. D." Inside lay an emerald green dress that belonged to a world where the air came pre-perfumed. Beneath it, heels that promised to make each step a small, elegant risk. I held the dress up to the dim light of my apartment, and for a moment, saw a version of myself. I didn't recognize someone taller, steadier. A woman who could walk into a room like it had been waiting for her. I should have boxed it back up. Instead, I texted a single word to the number I wasn't supposed to use. "Yes." His reply came so fast, it felt like he'd been watching the phone Saturday. 7. I didn't sleep much that night. Not because of the dress, or the heels, or the way my heart had learned a new rhythm that sounded suspiciously like his name. I didn't sleep because I understood the shape of an invitation that wasn't written on paper. He wasn't just asking me to a party. He was asking me to cross a line. Saturday arrived, as if the city had pressed a finger to its own pulse to slow it down. The car came when the clock said it would. The driver said my name, the way professionals do, turning it into a duty. We cut through the city like a needle through dark cloth. And when the gates opened onto the DeLuca estate, I understood how money could become a language. The lawn went on and on. Manicured into submission, the house had too many windows to count. All lit, as if nothing inside had ever known darkness. He waited at the steps. Not a prince. Not a villain. Just a man who had learned to make a room behave by walking into it. "Lila," he said, and somehow managed to make it sound like both a question and an answer. "Adrian," I returned. Before I could be small about it, his eyes took me in. Not with hunger, with certainty. "You were right," he said softly. "About what? The color?" He offered his arm and I placed my hand on it, telling myself it was just balance. Inside, a chandelier like a galaxy trembled with light. People turned. Some smiled without warmth. Some didn't bother. Whispers draft through money the way wind finds doorframes. I felt them on my skin. He walked slower than I expected. As if this, too, was a choice he refused to rush. He introduced me to donors and allies, to names that built the skyline. and names that lived beneath it. I did not belong, and yet he kept me at his side as if I did. Somewhere between the first flute of champagne and the second, I understood that his power didn't come from being feared. It came from never flinching. We met his mother near an installation of framed photographs, children smiling with brave eyes. The reason for the night dressed up in gold letters, Elena De Luca, was beautiful. The way winter can be polished and cold and older than your coat can handle. She kissed her son's cheek and looked at me the way surgeons look at X-rays. Elena, he said. This is Lila Monroe. She took my hand in a grip that assessed and decided at the same time. Florence, she said, as if testing me for a password. My grandmother. I said, ah. Her mouth formed a smile that didn't touch her eyes. Some roots en Dieu. She shifted her gaze to her son. Your guests require you. My guest requires nothing, he said, not looking away from me. Everyone requires something, she said, and somehow made it sound like both a threat and a prayer. She glided away, leaving perfume and expectation in her wake. We hadn't moved 3 steps before the room sharpened into a woman in red. She was stunning in that way that makes even other women stare, cheekbones built to cast shadows. A mouth that looked like it had never learned to say please. Her eyes grazed me and landed elsewhere. As if I were a placeholder someone had failed to remove. Adrian, she purred. Your mother said you'd show. Francesca, he said. And there was history in the way he said it. You look well. I do most things well, she said, smiling just for him, including remembering where I belong. She let the sentence finish on me. He didn't rise. He didn't even shift. Enjoy the evening, Francesca. She laughed. A sound like crystal threatening to crack. I always do. We moved on. The music rose and fell in corners. And someone laughed across the room like they had never been poor. Then Marco appeared. Not out of nothing, out of entitlement. Handsome in the way younger brothers often are. The kind of handsome that gets them forgiven when they shouldn't be. He wore his suit like it had been poured onto him, and his pride like a scent. Brother, he said, too loudly. You've brought charity to a charity. His eyes slid over me. Looking for a seam. A waitress in silk. How generous of you. There are 1,000 ways to break. Some of them are even quiet. I felt the old shame prick under my skin, and then go still. I could have lowered my eyes. I almost did. But Adrian's voice reached me first. Even and cold enough to leave frost. She's my guest, he said. And the room obeyed. Watch your mouth. Marco smiled with too many teeth. So serious. It was a compliment. Try one that sounds like it, Adrian said, and held his gaze until Marco found something in the middle distance worth leaving for. When he was gone, I realized my hands were fists. Adrian looked at them and then back at me, and some of the steel drained from his face. You're trembling, he said quietly. I'm not. I lead. Okay, he said. And let me have it. The orchestra swelled as if the night had been waiting for this exact cue. He turned to me. Not a bow. Not a command. Something like a question. Wearing certainty's suit. Dance with me. I don't belong here, I whispered. Which was true and truer. Under lights like these, his mouth tilted. Then why bring me, I added. Because the woman I was an hour ago would never have asked. He leaned just close enough that the words belonged only to us. Because I wanted to see what would happen if I did. He took my hand. His other hand found the small of my back. And something ancient in me remembered what it was to trust a lead. We moved. Not perfectly. Not like people who'd practiced in rooms smaller than this one. but like we understood the cost of stepping away. The music folded around us. At some point, my shoulders dropped, and the world stopped trying to teach me a lesson. "You don't belong in this room," he murmured, the hint of a smile finally showing itself. "I know," I said. "I'm here, anyway." "Good," he said. "Stay anyway." He didn't push. He didn't pull. He was simply there. Exactly where I needed him to be, for the steps to make sense. My dress whispered against my legs. His breath grazed the air near my temple. I let myself be alone with him, in a crowd of people who would have paid good money to be anywhere but alone. When the song ended, he didn't release my hand right away. He lifted it, as if to test its weight. "I have to check on the auction totals," he said. Apology bare and unhidden. 5 minutes. "Will you be all right? I can stand in a room," I said lightly. "You can do a great deal more," he said. And then he was gone. The crowd parting without being asked. I made it 3 sips into a glass of water before Elena found me again. This time without fanfare. She slid into the space beside me like a thought. "You can't stop thinking, Miss Monroe," she said, which sounded more like a summons than a greeting. "Walk with me." We didn't go far. Just to a small side room that felt like a throat connecting the heart of the house to the mouth that devoured guests and sent them back out sparkling. She didn't sit. "Neither did I. My son," she said. And then paused, as if the word required repositioning. "He has been distracted." I didn't answer. I wasn't about to confess that distraction had a pulse I could feel from across a room. She studied me for one measured beat. Then she took a slim envelope from her evening bag and placed it on a low table near us. The paper was the kind that has weight and intention. $50,000. She said. "Walk away tonight." The room did an old thing, expanded and contracted at the same time. I looked at the envelope and saw numbers turning back into hours. I saw textbooks. And rent I wouldn't have to count out. And groceries, chosen because I wanted them, not because they were cheap. I saw my mother shaking her head and smiling the way mothers do when they know something will cost you either way. "Good women get destroyed in our world," Elena said. And for the first time since I'd met her, the word world sounded less like a crown and more like a wound. "I'm not for sale," I said. But my voice wasn't as steady as I needed it to be. "This isn't a sale," she returned. "It's an exit." She lifted her chin. "Take it. Cash it Monday morning. Do not answer his calls. Do not explain. It's the kindest thing you can do for both of you." "I barely know him," I said, which had never felt more like both a truth and a lie. "And yet, you are already changing him," she said softly, as if accusing me of a miracle. "He misses made things. He delegates things he should not. He watches doorways like they will deliver you." She swallowed something I couldn't see. "I know what it is to be chosen by a DeLuca man. I know what it costs." Her voice didn't break. It didn't need to. The way she held herself did the breaking for it. She left me alone with the envelope, as if it could speak. I didn't touch it. I didn't need to. Every dollar inside it knew my name and my debts, and the exact weight of the bracelet on my wrist. I stayed exactly where I was until the air told me he was near. Adrian filled the doorway like certainty wearing a tux. His eyes went first to the envelope, then to my face. He didn't ask what it was. He already knew. "Yet you're still here," he said. And it wasn't triumph. It was relief he didn't dare fully feel. I picked up the envelope and placed it back on the table very carefully, as if precision could turn a decision into a virtue. "I'm still here," I said. He took a step closer. The room didn't get smaller. I did. Not in the way people shrink when they're afraid. In the way people make room for whatever they've been pretending they didn't want. You don't have to do this. He said. I know. I said, you could walk away? He said, I know. I said again. His gaze searched my face, like he was trying to find the door I was using. Why stay? Because I don't want easy. I said. And the words surprised me by how right they felt. I want real. For a heartbeat he didn't move. Then he did. Crossing the field between us, like someone who had spent a lifetime learning control, and was willing to misplace it, for one sacred minute. He touched my face with a hand that could bend a city and used it to be careful. His thumb traced the line of my jaw, like he was memorizing it for a test. He didn't plan to ace, but refused to fail. Lila. He said. And it came out rough. Not because he didn't know how to be smooth, but because smooth was the wrong language. I didn't wait for him to decide whether this was wise. I rose to meet him, meaning to be brave, and landing somewhere closer to honest. The first press of his mouth against mine wasn't polite or practiced. It was something two people do when they have run out of ways to be alone. Heat flared. Fast and certain. The kind that lights dark rooms without needing permission. He gathered me by the waist with a possessiveness that should have scared me, and didn't, because possession without respect is theft. And this was nothing like that. This was a man telling the truth with his hands, after a life of lying with his silence. He tasted like whiskey, and late decisions. I answered him with hunger I'd buried under work and rented sleep, and the long tired of pretending I didn't need anything. His fingers threaded into my hair. And I forgot where we were, and why it mattered. The envelope could have burst into flame. I wouldn't have looked when he finally pulled back. It was only far enough to find my eyes. His were darker than any ballroom deserved. If you stay, he said. Breath unsteady. I won't let you go easily. Good. I whispered. Don't. He closed his eyes for a fraction of a second. And something like a prayer shifted the angle of his mouth. You don't know what you're asking. I know exactly. I said. And meant it in all the ways I didn't yet understand. He rested his forehead against mine. Just long enough to borrow steadiness. A sound cut through the house, then distant. Urgent. The kind of sound people pretend not to hear when they want their lives to remain parties. His jaw tightened. He straightened without letting go of me completely. I have to handle something, he said. The control, back in his voice like armor, finding its way home. It won't take long. Go. I said. Because the part of me that wanted to keep him didn't want to become the part of him that had to be kept. Wait for me here, he said. And it wasn't a command. It was a hope, dressed as one. When he left, the room was too full of the absence he made. I sat. I stood. I laughed once without sound because if you don't laugh at the exact moment, your life becomes a choice. You might mistake fear for wisdom. I looked at the envelope again and saw a map out of a maze. I'd been walking for years. I looked at my hands and saw the slightest tremor. Then watched it still. I thought about my mother telling me love adds up in different math than money. And sometimes you pay with a currency you didn't know you had. I didn't count the bills. I didn't need to. I placed the envelope exactly where Elena had left it. As if returning a verdict you can live with. Then I waited. Not like a woman who had surrendered her agency, but like a woman who had exercised it and knew the quiet after a decision is not emptiness. It's breath. He came back. The tux was the same. The man inside it wasn't. Something had been decided elsewhere. And the dust of it clung to him. There was a shadow on his cuff. He didn't hide. Adrian, I said. And in the saying was acceptance I couldn't have rehearsed. It's not mine, he said softly. He didn't ask. I answered. He exhaled. The kind that lifts and lowers regret without naming it. His eyes flicked to the table. The envelope hadn't moved. He looked at me like he was standing at the edge of a cliff he'd built, and was astonished by how much he wanted to jump. "You continue to surprise me," he said. And it wasn't a compliment or a warning. It was a confession. "Get used to it," I said. And the smile that rose between us felt like the first true thing I'd owned in months. He reached for my hand, turned my wrist, and pressed his mouth to the inside of it. "Right where the pulse proves you're here." The bracelet warmed beneath his breath. My heart answered in the only language it had left. Outside, the orchestra found a slower song. Inside, I understood that temptation doesn't always arrive to pull you off your path. Sometimes it arrives to show you the road you would have taken if you'd been braver sooner. I threaded my fingers through his and held on, not like a drowning woman, like someone who has decided which shore is hers. Somewhere in the house, people toasted numbers and called it generosity. Somewhere else, a brother nursed his pride, and an ex-lover coiled her smile around new prey. Somewhere, a mother told herself she had done the right thing, and found that right things can still feel like losses. Here, in a room no one would remember, I made a promise I didn't speak aloud. I would not run. I would not flinch. I would ask for real, and take what came with it. He lifted our joined hands and breathed against my knuckles, as if sealing a pact neither of us could later lie about. "Tomorrow," he said, voice low. "We do this without the audience." "Tomorrow," I echoed. He walked me back into the light then. Not as decoration, not as rebellion, but as the answer he had decided to give. Conversations dipped and rose. Eyes did what eyes do. He did not let go of my hand until we reached the place where the night returned me to myself, at the top of the steps, with the lake throwing silver at the shore. He turned to me. "You don't belong in this room," he said. One last time, as if testing the words for cracks. "I know," I said, "but I belong with you in it." He smiled. Then the rare, unarmored one that made him look like a boy who'd once believed in gentler things. "Stay anyway," he said. "I will," I answered, and meant the always inside, the already. The car door opened. The driver said my name like a ritual. I slid inside, the dress arranging itself around a woman who had decided to live with the consequences of wanting the right wrong thing. Through the window, I watched him watch me go. And for a moment, the house behind him looked smaller than the space inside his chest, where my name now lived. On the ride home, the city lights stitched themselves into a sentence I would spend months learning how to read. When I reached my apartment, the room wasn't any bigger, but I set the bracelet on the nightstand, and the card beside it, like two small anchors in a sea I'd chosen. I did not open the envelope. I didn't need to hold it to feel its weight. I lay awake and let the night speak in a voice. I recognize now the sound of a risk you finally stop resisting. By the time sleep found me, it had learned my address, and my dreams had new furniture candlelight. A waltz. A mouth that tasted like a future I shouldn't want and couldn't refuse. I'd stepped into his world. It hadn't swallowed me. Not yet. Not ever. If I could help it. But between us lived a truth that would not lie down. Love in rooms like those is either a promise or a weapon. Either way, it S for blue. When morning came, my phone buzzed once. Breakfast. The message read. I stared at the screen until my reflection steadied. Then I typed back the only word that felt like breathing. Yes. The night cracked open with a phone call. Not the kind that asks permission. The kind that ends a conversation before it starts. We were still at the gala, when Adrian's expression shifted. Something flickered behind his calm like a storm seen through glass. One of his men approached, murmuring in Italian too low for me to catch. Then those words. A situation at the docks. He didn't look at me right away. He looked at the floor, as if grounding himself, then finally met my eyes. I need to handle this. Now I asked. Already knowing the answer, he nodded once. The distance between us filled with things I couldn't name. Wait for me here, he said softly. Please. I wanted to ask what kind of situation required midnight and men with guns. But he didn't. Because somewhere between the restaurant and this ballroom, I had learned that some truths only arrive when you're ready to pay for them. So I stayed, hours stretched thin. The music died down. The guests left in chauffeured laughter, and the mansion folded into silence. I wandered through it like a ghost down hallways, lined with portraits that seemed to watch and warn in equal measure. When the door finally opened, dawn was bleeding into the lake. Adrian stepped inside. His stivos gone. His hair mussed. His shirt cuff darkened with something that wasn't shadow. Blood. He didn't hide it. Didn't pretend. He just looked at me, the weight of the night in his eyes, and said quietly, "It's not mine. I should have been afraid." Instead, I felt something I couldn't explain. Not acceptance exactly, but understanding. He didn't have to say what had happened. Some truths arrive already written. I stepped closer, my voice steadier than I felt. If I'm part of your life, I have to accept all of it. His eyes softened then. The first crack in the armor I'd ever seen. He reached out not to pull me close, but to touch the edge of my face. Like he was confirming I was still real. "Then you're braver than I am," he said. I wanted to tell him he was wrong, that bravery isn't about facing the dark. It's about letting someone else see you inside it. But he was already gone again. Standing near the window, the early light outlining the exhaustion in his shoulders, he poured a drink, but didn't touch it. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The house was too quiet. The kind of quiet that knows what it's seen. Finally, he turned back. "You should rest," he said. "You've had enough of my world for one night." Maybe he was right. But instead of sleeping, I stayed awake long after he left for another call. The blood on his cuff burned into my mind, not in horror, but in clarity. This was the man I'd chosen to see, beyond rumor and reputation. And seeing meant accepting the parts that didn't fit inside stories of happily ever after. When morning came, sunlight found me still sitting on the couch in his study, wrapped in one of his jackets that smelled faintly of cedar and smoke. I rose quietly, crossed to his desk, and placed the envelope of money, the one his mother had offered me, right in the center. Untouched, I didn't leave a note. Some decision don't need punctuation. Then I left the house without waiting for him to wake. The lake was silver in the early light. The air smelled of salt and iron. Each step down, the long drive felt heavier and lighter at once. By the time I reached the gate, I knew one thing for sure. Whatever happened next, I'd already crossed the line between what I was afraid of and what I was meant for. When Adrian found the envelope later that day, I wasn't there to see his face, but I can imagine it. The man who'd built an empire out of control, staring at a choice he couldn't control at all. I picture his fingers brushing the paper, his jaw tightening, then loosening as something new settled in his chest, something he hadn't felt in years. Later that evening, he showed up at my apartment. No car this time. No entourage. Just him. He stood in the doorway like he wasn't sure if he should enter. And for the first time since I met him, he looked unsure of anything. "You continue to surprise me, Lila Monroe," he said finally. And then, "Quieter." I'm not used to being surprised. I stepped aside to let him in. For a while, we didn't speak. We just sat, two people who had seen too much of each other to go back to pretending. He told me things he'd never told anyone. About his father. About the night the empire became his. about the weight of being feared more than loved, and I listened. Not because I wanted to fix him, but because I finally understood that sometimes listening is the fixing. 6 months later, Chicago wakes differently when you're not running from it. The mornings are slower, softer. The coffee tastes like a beginning instead of a survival tactic. I stood by the window of our penthouse, overlooking Lake Michigan, sunlight spilling over white sheets and wooden floors. The city below was already humming horns. Footsteps. The steady pulse of life continuing, the lake stretched out like glass. And for a moment, I could almost see my reflection in it, not the waitress who once broke plates and promised she'd never dream again. But the woman who'd finally decided dreaming wasn't weakness. I'd gone back to nursing school. Adrian insisted. In that stubborn way he insists on things that matter. You'll finish what you started, he'd said, months ago. The morning I registered for classes. I don't want you to become someone who belongs to my world. I want you to bring light into it. He'd said it like an order, but I heard the love buried inside it. And now, every time I walked into the children's clinic funded by the DeLuca Foundation, I carried that love like armor. The kids there didn't care who Adrian was. They only cared that their medicine came on time, that the lights stayed on, that someone smiled at them, even when the pain was too loud. I liked being part of that kind of power, the kind that healed, instead of hurt. That morning, as sunlight pooled across the room, I fastened my mother's bracelet. The silver charm caught the light. Steady as a heartbeat, Adrian's footsteps echoed down the hallway, measured, confident, familiar. He appeared in the doorway, adjusting his tie. "You're beautiful," he said. I smiled at his reflection in the glass. "You're late. Some things are worth being late for." He came behind me, sliding his arms around my waist, pressing a kiss to the back of my neck. The warmth of him, the steadiness, it all felt like home. I turned in his arms to face him. He looked like the man. The city still whispered about dark suit, composure, control. But I'd learnt the truth control wasn't his armor anymore. It was his language for love. We'd built something fragile. Yes, but fragile doesn't mean weak. It means it's worth protecting, sometimes. At night, the world still reminds me who he is. A phone call in Italian, a driver waiting longer than he should. But he always returns, and when he does, there's always that same look, not of guilt, not of confession, but of gratitude. The kind of look that says, "I made it back to you again." People say, love built on danger can't last, that it burns too bright, too hot, that it consumes before it completes. But maybe they've never seen what happens when two people learn to hold fire without letting it devour them. Maybe they've never met a man who would burn the world just to keep you safe, and a woman who'd stay, not out of need, but out of choice. Because what we built isn't perfect. It's honest. And that's better. Some evenings, after work, we walk the lakeshore. No bodyguards. Not suits. No walls, just us and the water. He tells me stories about Florence. About his grandmother, who taught him to dance in bare feet on tile floors. I tell him about my mother. About the nights she stayed awake, counting bills, but still found time to teach me how to dream anyway. The space between those stories feels sacred. It's where we live now. It took me a long time to understand that love doesn't erase the danger. It redefines it. Danger stops being the enemy. It becomes the price you pay for something worth keeping. We both changed, in ways the world will never see. He learned that power means nothing if it can't protect what's pure. And I learned that strength isn't about standing alone, it's about standing beside someone and saying, "I see you. Afen here, tonight. We're hosting another gala. Same foundation. Same mansion. But everything feels different now. The staff greets me by name. Elena smiles when she sees me, real smiles now. The kind that took months to earn. Even Marco nods, grudging respect in his eyes. And Francesca, well, she's moved on to someone else's story, but I know the truth. The gala isn't for them. It's for us, for what survived. When I step onto the balcony before the guests arrive, the lake is already blushing under the sunset. I rest my hands on the railing, breathing in the scent of roses and rain. Behind me, Adrian's voice is quiet, almost reverent. Thinking about running away, I smile without turning. Maybe just checking if I still could. And I say, I just don't want to. His arms slide around me, familiar and strong. He kisses the hollow just below my ear, the way he always does, when words aren't enough. We stand there a long time, watching the city come alive, hearts beating steady against the rhythm of a world that never really stops. When I first met him, he told me to take better care of precious things. It's taken me this long to realize. He wasn't just talking about the bracelet. He was talking about moments like this, fleeting, fragile, irreplaceable. Love isn't the absence of danger. It's the courage to hold on anyway. Final voiceover, soft, intimate, reflective. They said love, built on danger, can't last. But maybe they've never met a man who'd burn the world just to keep you safe. Maybe they've never understood that safety isn't always silence. Sometimes it's a heartbeat you trust in the dark. Some stories aren't about perfection. They're about choosing each other again and again, even when the world says you shouldn't. And maybe that's what makes them last. The music swells, soft piano, lake waves, laughter from far below. The city glows like it's holding its breath. And in the reflection of the glass, two figures stand close, their silhouettes indistinguishable from the light that surrounds them. And for the first time in a long time, I know this truth: we don't always get to choose the world we're born into, but we can choose who we face it with. I chose him, and he chose me, again, and again, and again. If this story moved you tonight, if it made you believe that love can still grow, even in the darkest places, take a second to share that feeling. Click the like button so more hearts can find it. Leave a comment. Tell me what part of Lila and Adrian's story stayed with you the most. And if you'd like to walk with me through more stories of hope, redemption, and the kind of love that refuses to die, hit subscribe and turn on the bell icon so you never miss the next chapter. Because every week, there's another journey, waiting, another story, where courage meets the heart.